This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
No, don't be afraid. This time, it isn't one of your nightmares. This one was mine.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz. Gil will be with us shortly. Before we begin, if you don't mind, and if you're enjoying our podcast, please hit the like button. It's how the folks at YouTube, it's how they decide who gets presents versus who gets coal in their Christmas stockings. And please subscribe because, hey, that way you'll always be ahead of the story curve here. Now that that's out of the way, you might not know Scott Stone's name, but he really is a rolling stone. Over the course of his career, Scott has created and produced more than 50 television series that have aired in nearly every country in the whole world. That's massive. Among those shows, The Mole, Legends of the Hidden Temple, The Man Show, Loveline, Brain Surge, 1,000 Places to See Before You Die, and Top Design. And Scott's shows have introduced America to Anderson Cooper, Jimmy Kimmel, Adam Carolla, Dr. Drew PINSKY, KRISTEN Wiig, NICOLE Scherzinger, Josh Henderson, and Greg Kinnear. And that's just for starters. Gil and I met Scott on FREDDY'S Nightmares, another show Scott and his company produced. That led to Children of the Corn 2, which Scott and his company produced. We'll get to those adventures and misadventures shortly. But first, how the hell does someone create so many terrific TV shows that play literally all over the world? You said, I like television that's as thrilling to make as it is to watch.
Yeah, well, the truth be told, I don't really get thrilled watching a lot of TV, so it's really hard to live by that now that I think about it. That was when I was quite young, frankly, and everything was thrilling to make because we were scared shitless most of the time. There's a sort of an inverse proportion, I think, to the anxiety of trying to get a show done on budget and on time than focusing on, what's it going to look like when it's finished. But yes, my kids laugh at the length of my IMDb page. We're my ex-business partner used to say we're kind of like the equivalent of television spackle. Like we look for holes and we fill them. So I thought that was a terrible thing to say, frankly. But
you've made almost every kind of TV that there is, except for maybe straight news, reality, games, documentaries, comedy, scripted.
I have a good friend of mine who shall remain nameless, who EPs a very successful primetime network non-scripted show. And he called me after like 3 or 4 years of doing it and said, I'm getting a little bored. Like, I want to try something new and different. And I said to him, schmuck, you ride this thing all the way off the cliff, right? You just keep going. And right. This is now 15 years ago, and he's still doing it, and he's making a lot of money, and it's a great show. And yeah, there's something to be said for both. I'll be honest with you. I am blessed with having had a very diverse and interesting career.
You're even into the podcasting world with a podcast called Fear Not with Alonzo Bowden and Dr. Barry Glassner, a weekly comedy news podcast about fear and fear-mongering.
Yeah, that actually was about as close as I got to solid news. Actually, that's not true. I did a thing called NIWS 1,000 years ago. I'm a news junkie. So for me, all of the things that you talked about kind of come from me being a news junkie, because I'm like, oh, that's interesting, or that's interesting. And I go into Wikipedia holes faster than I think people go into potholes here in LA. I think that show, Fear Not, it has allowed me, frankly, to be sane in this world that we're in right now, particularly with what's going on in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. That is based on a book called The Culture of Fear, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend reading it, particularly right now, because it's all about the fact that people are trying to create fear in us and why. And once you realize that you're being manipulated and how you're being manipulated, you really do bring the whole tone of everything down. And I'll give you a small little tip. If you see a headline that lets your beard hair or your top of your hair on fire, read the article from the end to the beginning. Because at the end, the final paragraph is almost always, it's probably not that bad because of X, Y, and Z. And then if you go with that as the basis and go the other direction, the headline is no longer all that scary. So that is kind of the nature of the podcast. We're not doing it right now, unfortunately. We're doing it up through COVID, and then we had to take a break. But it's still, I think originally I sold it as a TV show, and then it didn't happen for various reasons, and then we did it as a podcast.
As scattershot as it might seem to the naked eye, there's actually a rather human design to it all. You seem to be anticipating things in the zeitgeist. But
well, I can't say that I anticipate anything other than I'm hoping I'll wake up tomorrow and have something that sparks my brain. But I do follow my heart, and it's to my own detriment half the time.
But this is part of the nature of your creative instinct, that your antenna are always out sensing this, that. You said you're a news junkie, so there's always the anticipation of events to come after today and tomorrow. Now that we've laid out a bit of all the amazing things you've accomplished, let's deconstruct the whole damn thing. Where did this madness begin, Scott?
My interest started in the back of a courtroom in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I grew up. When I was a kid, this is really weird. I didn't think about this till recently. I used to take the bus from our suburban neighborhood in Indianapolis downtown to the courthouse and just sit in the back of courtrooms and watch trials.
How old are you at this point?
14, maybe 13, 14.
Wow.
My first job was a very good friend of my parents. My dad was in the furniture business, and a friend of ours owned this big furniture store downtown Indianapolis. And I think it was 6 or 7 stories. It was called People's Outfitting. And I used to go down there on the weekends and vacuum the floors. So I'd start at the top floor and I just vacuum until I get down to the first floor, and I think I got paid $12 to do that. And because of that, I used to easily take the bus downtown. So I used to go downtown when I'd have time off and the courts are open during the summer, and I'd watch court cases. And I think I always loved that kind of storytelling with a beginning, middle, and an end that had like a real honest to goodness rules to it. And I thought it was fascinating. And I think that was my first inspiration.
Were you a storyteller yourself in any way at that point in your life?
I don't think I was that advanced. I was a terrible student. I was like a B student at best. But I did like to be involved in that kind of geeky stage crewy stuff. And we had a TV station and a radio station at my school, and I volunteered for that. And I volunteered working for the TV station in Indianapolis. And then I went into politics. I actually worked for a guy named Birch Bayh, who was a senator from Indiana. Evan Bayy's dad. Then I started working for him in his campaigns. And, politics is literally show business for ugly people. So I got so much out of that said to me, I'm good behind the scenes. Don't put me out there as a candidate. But I do like to be involved in that kind of work. And I think that's what led me to it. And then I came to LA to go to film school.
You went to USC.
Yes, I applied to film school having not a clue what that meant, because I saw Jerry Lewis on The Tonight Show pimping his book about being an auteur. And he said in the interview that he teaches directing at the USC Film School. And I thought, wait a minute, I can go to school and Jerry Lewis can be my teacher? And that's why I applied to.
Wow. So Jerry Lewis made you do it.
And I have that book somewhere. I just bought it off the internet.
Oh my God.
Somewhere. The book is actually, what did I do? And I'll find it. It's here somewhere. It was ridiculous. It cost like $400. Like there's only 100 copies of this book. It was crazy.
It's Jerry Lewis's book.
Jerry Lewis wrote a book about the auteur theory of filmmaking, and it's brilliant. He actually was a better director than a comedian, frankly. And it's a really good book, and it's the reason why I went to film school.
You began your career while you were attending USC. You went to work for Academy Award-winning documentarian Charles Braverman.
Yeah, Chuck is still doing it. Actually, he's actually has a competing podcast doing similar things in the documentary world to what you guys are doing.
That bastard.
It's a great, yeah, I know, right? And Chuck is a kind of a brilliant. He was early on in the TV world. He was doing things for Showtime when Showtime wasn't cool, and yeah, and I worked with him, and it was great. I cut my teeth on doing everything.
I mean, you say Showtime wasn't cool as opposed to like us cool kids over at HBO?
Totally, yeah, yeah. It was the poor person's HBO.
You went on to work with him producing the popular Showtime series, The Big Laugh Off, and What's Up America, and then the historic comedy special, Andy Kaufman Plays Carnegie Hall.
Yes, sir. To be really clear, I was at the company when it was done, and I was in New York when we were shooting it. Chuck was very lean and mean in those days, so everybody did everything. But it was a great and classic special. If you haven't seen it, it's worth up to see it.
Andy Kaufman was a fascinating individual.
Yes, and this special actually tells a lot about him. But the famous thing about it was at the end of the show, he had school buses waiting outside of the theater, outside of Carnegie Hall, and took the entire audience to a school to do cookies and milk after the show.
Rather famously.
Right? It's like, come on, kids, we're going for cookies and milk.
He was one truly unique, and in working with him, what was that process? Was he?
I didn't work directly with him. Chuck did. And interesting enough, I haven't seen it yet, but I understand Chuck's son, Alex, just directed a doc about Andy Kaufman, using some of, I'm sure, his dad's footage, or certainly his dad's relationships with Samuda and those guys. But I haven't seen it yet. I hear it's supposed to be pretty good.
Like I said, an interesting character. He would have been fascinating to work with. I guess my question is, as a collaborator, he was he seemed so burrowed into himself. What was he like in the collaborative process? Someone who was, and yet so particular and genius in what he was.
As I said, I didn't really have a lot. I was 19 or 20 years old when we did that special. So I was the guy behind the guy behind the guy. But I will tell you, when I did work with Chuck on a show called The Big Laugh Off, which was before there was Last Comic Standing and other stand-up comedy competitions, it was the very first. And the runner-ups of the competition were like Ellen DeGeneres and Jerry Seinfeld and Robin Williams, and Chris Rock, not Chris Rock, Eddie Murphy, and there were just some incredible stand-ups that
all these wannabes
competition. And hanging with them, I learned so much about, all these wannabes, so much about the comedic mind that it really did help me later on when I was working with the Adam Carollas of the world, who I still believe is single-handedly one of the funniest people I know in real life. Just like being able to talk to somebody who's naturally funny and quick-witted and smart. You do learn how to understand that kind of comic mind when you work with that many kids.
What insight did you gain about the comic mind?
The first thing I learned is never try to be funnier than a comic. First of all, I'm just not a funny guy anyway, but I just don't try to compete, because when they start competing with each other, it's hilarious. But I don't try to compete.
When I first got to town, I played softball every Sunday with a standing pickup game. It was mostly stand-up comedians. Jerry Seinfeld played in the game. Tom Arnold, bunch of guys like that. And
Larry Miller.
I think he played a couple of times. And the thing that was oddest about the experience was that they all did a Vin Scully. And so at any particular moment in the game, there were 6 or 7 Vin Scullys going off at the same time, commenting on doing the play-by-play. Of course.
Perfect example.
Yeah. So anyway, I know what you mean.
I just worked with a wonderful comedian, female comedian who's hilarious. And I learned the other thing that most important is to be a good audience. I am a good laugher.
Yes.
I did a show with Kathy Griffin once. I've never laughed so hard in my life. Just naturally funny.
You finish at USC and you start your first production company. You don't go to work for somebody else. You go to work for yourself. Sam Stone Productions, which a year later you sell to TV syndicator Telepictures. Wow. What did you do? What did you do in that first year? It all sounds
very glamorous right now.
Yeah,
it was very desperate at the time. I'll be honest with you. It's like we tried to set up this company, and I went into business with a guy from Indianapolis who I didn't really even know growing up, but I happened to meet after I graduated, and he wanted to have this big production company, and he had a lot of money. And I'm like, all right, sure, I'll work with you. And we had a fancy Sunset Boulevard office. We had a logo and T-shirts and sweatshirts and cards designed by a guy named Rod Dyer, who's one of the most famous graphic designers of his day, who I met through Chuck Raven, actually.
Any productions, any actual productions in the can? Well, never mind the pipeline.
Zero in terms of TV production.
Okay.
We actually, it's a funny story. We were doing some commercials, which he had, through his relationships in Indiana, had booked, and we were doing those out here. And then we had one show that we thought we'd sold to Telepictures, actually, which was a fascinating show that I still think is a great idea. It was called Number One. It's a straight documentary following people who are the top person in their particular field. And we had booked John Huston, the director, and Red Adair, the guy who put out the oil well fires.
Yeah.
And of course, in those days, it was all men, and it was financed by Holiday Inns, the corporation, and they wanted it to be their Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. We had this incredible cinematographer lined up to do it. We literally got the phone call from Red Adair that we should come down to South America because there was an oil well blowing up and he was going to put the fire out. And we were on our way to LAX, and I got the phone call that the guy from Holiday Inn who bought the show had been fired, and the show was canceled. Literally on the way to the air. So that was the only show we sold, and we were basically not making any money, and we had this very high overhead. And the people at Telepictures who loved this show and loved me and loved what I did on it said, why don't you sell us all your equipment? Because we had editing equipment and stuff. And said, just come work at the company. And so I say they bought the company. Really what they did is bought me. I spent 7 or 8 years there, and then we merged with Lorimar, and that became, that's how I met you, Gil.
At the end of the day, they weren't wrong.
At the end of the day, it was a good deal for both of us. We both did well.
There you go.
And a lot of shows. I got to go do the People's Court, actually, which was like me sitting in the back of the courtroom when I was 13 years old. That was fun.
You were part of the creation of the People's Court of that show?
Full disclosure, no. I was on the syndicator side, but when we were doing the pilot, I was there for the pilot, and then I was responsible for getting it all together for us to distribute it.
But a very strong position in what happened to the show. It must have been, when you think of what we all live the strangest lives, because we get this idea, hey, what if I could make up stuff and then sell it to people, and somehow it ends up happening. It's a real privilege.
Me. Yeah, I don't know how that happens, frankly.
But to have, as a kid in Indianapolis, going to courtrooms because you like it, and it's the story. It's the of course a courtroom is a great story all by itself in any trial, and to suddenly find yourself turning that into a way to make a living, part of the way to make a living. That was there ever a moment as that show began to occur where you connected those dots of, wow, point A to point
Yeah,
wherever this is.
All I thought about was, why didn't I think of this? This is a brilliant idea. And had I thought of it, I probably wouldn't have done those other 50 shows I did. I would have only done one. Stu Billett, who created that show and who produced it for many, many years, who passed away about a year and a half ago, was a dear friend, and I loved him. I always used to joke with him. It's like, Stu, because he always talk about my career and how many shows I've done. And I go, yeah, but just one. It would have been nice to just have that one and just do that one. Although I probably would have been bored with that. But he was a great guy, and I love him and I miss him. And just to have that one like that.
After People's Court, what other shows did he create or work on?
He did another court show called Superior Court, and then he had a long career before that. He had done Split Second, the game show. He worked with Ralph Edwards. Ralph Edwards was his partner on People's Court. And so he's done a lot of shows back east in New York and out here, and just a classic guy and a classy guy, just a really good human being. He's actually, if I may say this about him for 1 second, take a moment, personal privilege. He is one of the few people that gave me some hope that you can be a good-hearted person and still be in show business. That you can do the right thing. You can treat your people properly. You can not yell at people. You can just have a good, solid, be good with your family, all those things. And Stu is, love you, Stu. Ralph Edwards as well. Also one of those Menchie guys.
This is always wonderful to know that there are more Menches than you realize in these trenches.
Right. For the most part in our extended careers, excluding you, Scott, we never dealt with those Menches.
I thought you were going the other direction.
Yeah, wow.
I just read the article about Joel Silver at Oh, geez.
Oh, yeah, truly.
Amazing. I got so many emails yesterday from people telling me about this, what happened with Joel.
I almost sent it to you, and I thought, why?
Yeah. I must have gotten 15 emails from people with the attachment of the article. I thought, gee, that's interesting. Why are they sending me the article? I was like, I don't care anymore.
There's so much more to that story than is in the article. Like, they didn't know that when they made that deal with him for all those movies. Right. Come on.
Right.
That's no.
Well, let's go back to Telepictures. Let's go back to Telepictures, because from Telepictures, you went to Lorimar, and that's where we entered the picture.
Cross. Yes.
Where the magic happened. Yes.
Yeah. And Alan, although you mentioned all of those people that he introduced the world to, the two people that you didn't mention were the team of writing, producing Adler and Katz.
Yeah, well,
he was responsible for as well.
In which I thought he was the vaudeville act when I heard about him.
Yeah, that's actually true. The first produced piece of work from the from whatever the fuck this is. That was that's all your fault. You started.
I'm sorry.
This. You encouraged this madness. What's wrong with you? Story,
and from it, I learned the most important thing I ever learned in show business, ever, in all the years. A penny spent is a penny wasted.
God, where have I heard that before? Where have I heard that? Oh God, it's my spine just.
Who said that? I can't imagine.
Let's, there's a huge fan base for the Freddy's Nightmares TV series. Huge.
Really? Where are they? And why don't they give me money?
Well, hey, Tales from the Crypt doesn't stream because it runs free on YouTube. I think I don't know. Is Freddy's Nightmares streaming? Because someone responsible owns it, right?
Yeah, it's owned by Warner Brothers.
Okay, so it's got so someone is taking care of it, and it might not be streaming.
Don't they own Tales from the Crypt as well?
No.
Who owns it?
They only licensed it.
Yeah.
Joel, Dick Donner, and his estate, Bob Zemeckis.
Don't get us started. It plays for free all the time. We don't see a fucking penny from it. But Freddy's Nightmares, like I said, it also has a really a huge fan base. There are websites and podcasts that review every episode.
I will have to do my homework now. I must admit,
I will share
underprepared, which is unlike me.
I will share these with you, Scott. These are the people who are going to be listening and watching this interview and waiting for this very part that we're about to talk about. The story of how Freddy's Nightmares, the Nightmare on Elm Street TV series, how that came into being, and then it came into being despite that writer's strike back in the 1980s.
Yeah, I honestly, I can't even remember how the writer's strike had anything to do with it, but I can tell you how I ended up doing the show, and I can tell you the show happened. Because it was really Bob Shea who decided that he wanted to do something with Freddy's. And Bob was in partnership with the people at Laura Martella Pictures, and I think they were developing a feature together or something. And keep in mind, this is at a time when Laura Martella Pictures was blowing up. This was a company that was a merger of two of the most successful independent companies in television.
Which were
Laura Mar Television, which was Merv Adelson and Lee. Yeah. Merv Adelson ran it, and what's his name, Lee, and a bunch of guys from Vegas, and they had sort of cornered all the primetime scripted independent television. They had huge independent TV. They had Perfect Strangers and Dallas and Knots Landing and Falcon Crest, and so they were a huge scripted production company. And Telepictures, which had started as a scrappy independent when I met them, I was literally, I think, the 10th employee at the company, grew into a company of several thousand people, became an international distribution company, primarily in the syndication world of daytime and prime access and news and information and talk and game and anything that's not scripted. Then the two companies came together and merged, and it became this behemoth independent. And they had a lot of money to throw around, and they decided to get into all kinds of other businesses, including the feature film business and the home video business, famously with the Jane Fonda videos, which was theoretically making $150 million in pure profit every year, or $100 million. So I'm now been with this company, Telepictures, for about 7 or 8 years, and I'm now the head of first run syndication. So we're developing all these shows together, and one of the things we said we wanted to do was to do low budget scripted shows that we do non-union, that uses some IP, and we shoot them, in a like a warehouse somewhere, and we crank them out. And the domestic guy says, that's really great. We need hour shows to go in these time periods on these stations. And then the international guy named Michael Solomon says, that's really great, but what I really need is 2-hour movies. Can we make it as 2-hour movies? And I'm like, well, I suppose we could. And I've done no scripted shows in my entire life, like nothing. I mean, there are scripted shows and non-scripted. Let's be really clear. Non-scripted shows are fully scripted, not the words, but the concepts and everything else. So I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm like, sure, let me see if we can find a showrunner that can do that. Meanwhile, the scripted guys are saying, I'm not sure that's possible, but they assigned me this guy named Jeff Freilich, who was already doing, I think, Knots Landing or something that was happening there, and said he'll figure it out. So now we're like, okay, well, I guess we'll do hours, and we'll do 2 hours. And I was still working at the company at the time as the head of development. And then the syndication guys say, what we're going to really need is we're going to need them ultimately to run as half hours eventually, because there are more half-hour time periods than there are hour time periods, and they're in prime access when you get more money. So do you think you can make them be cuttable down to a half-hour show? I'm like, sure, I guess. It's just writing, right?
Why not? Yeah, it's typing, whatever.
Never been done before, but sure, why not? So and I don't remember the conversation with Frylight because frankly, I wasn't in those conversations at that point. But they kind of said, okay, great. We go down this path of trying to do that. It's getting set up. And I'm not really that involved. And it's like at that point, it's Laura Martella Pictures and the scripted guys are really doing that. In the meantime, I had actually created with a guy named Bob Sines a kids show because they were looking for a kids show at the same time called Funhouse, which I created with JD Roth, and he was 19 at the time. And that show is being done in our department. I was also doing the new the Thundercats, the animated series. We were doing Gumby, the animated new version of Gumby. Plus, we were doing 6 other game shows that we were doing at the same time. So I'm in charge of this now, sort of me fiefdom of all these projects. But this is the first big scripted thing that we're going to be doing for syndication. And something happens. The home video department comes back and says, you know that $100 million profit? We didn't calculate in all the returns that are coming in now, and it's going to be a little lower than $100 million profit. It's going to be no profit. And
it's a little lower.
So everybody's like, well, can we cancel? What can we cancel? Like, we cancel Freddy's Nightmares. Where are we going to save this $100 million? And then a week later, they come back and say, you know, our calculations were off. It wasn't $100 million that we lost. It's actually, we're actually going to lose $100 million. And suddenly this behemoth company that had all this money was pretty much broke. So they turned around very quickly and sold the entire company to Warner Brothers.
Can I ask a question?
And I'm going to tell you the reason why that's important.
Well, but can I ask a question? All right. So on the issue was, well, there were more returns than we expected.
Because the way the home video business works, you sell them like magazines to the record stores in those days or Blockbuster, and you book the sale of them when you send them out, and you're supposed to keep a reserve for the ones that don't sell, that they're coming back. But this company was fraudulent that we bought, that did the Jane Fonda videos. We bought, it was called Stuart Carl Video, bought the company. They didn't book the reserve for the returns. And by the time we had bought the company, we hadn't done the due diligence, evidently.
Oh, dear.
In due diligence, find out, there's $200 million swing on returns. Because just before the deal, they shipped all these goods to make their numbers look better. And yes, they should all be in jail or went to jail, or I'm sure there were lawsuits.
That is
regardless.
Staggering. It's staggering.
There are books written about this story that I'm sure can tell you more than I know. And I think I got most of the facts right, but the people that were involved are now dead. So the crazy part about that is now we're being sold to Warner Brothers, and the guy who shall remain nameless, who was head of my new division of Warner Brothers, the person I was going to go work for, asked me to come in and tell him what was going on in my department. And I laid out all this stuff, and I said, we're doing this show, Freddy's Nightmares, and the show Funhouse, and all these other shows. And I think we should do a whole bunch more scripted shows, independently, non-union. We can make a bunch of money. We can shoot them outside of LA. And we should be doing a bunch of movies because Warner Brothers owns HBO. Let's do a bunch of, low budget movies for HBO, blah, 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 blah. So I lay this whole thing out, and he leans forward to me, and I'll never forget this like it was yesterday. And he says, well, Scott, things move slowly here. Almost exactly like that. And I said, okay, great. Thank you very much. And I picked all my stuff up, my book and everything else. And I went to my boss, who had just sold the company to Warner Brothers, and he put a bunch of money in his pocket, and I was happy for him. Really good guy, gave me my career. And I said, as part of my deal, I had to sign a 5-year contract to work for Warner Brothers. No options. Do you think you could change that? Because I'm not sure this is the right place for me. I'm not, I've never worked at a big company like this. I'm not sure I'm a big company kind of guy. I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. And so we came up with this idea, Freddy's Nightmares and Funhouse, those 2 shows that I'd helped create. And I would go create an independent production company to produce them. So that way, Warner Brothers didn't have to deal with making it a union show. And then suddenly it went from being $500,000 an episode to $5 million an episode. So I said, okay, great. That's great. So I made a 5-year deal into a 2-year deal. That's a really bad negotiation, by the way, to go produce these 2 shows. And it was a great decision in long run because I got to go make them. But more importantly, that's when I met you guys. So now you know exactly how much I knew about writing and producing and directing and developing a scripted television show.
Oh my God, what you set up. Oh my God, the Rubik's Cube of storytelling to get those things, those scripts, the work is a half hour, work is an hour, 2 independent half hours as 1 hour that works together, and all 4 half hours to work to all 4 half hours to work together as a 2-hour movie.
2-hour movie.
Right.
I can't believe we did it.
And it has to be 20 episodes, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So
22 minutes.
20 episodes. So it's basically 5 movies cut into 10 hours. No, it's 10 movies cut into 20 hours, cut into 40 half hours.
Now, the Writers Guild strike element was when they went to start the writing process. The Writers Guild, the writers were striking. And so they did I guess the first 6 scripts were written non-union, and neither Gil nor I were Writers Guild at that point. So we said, well, hey, nothing to us. And so a bunch of us I remember we were sitting in a room at the Chateau Marmont. Bob Shea.
With Bob Shea, probably.
Bob Shea. Yeah. And Bob Shea came in.
And Mike DeLuca.
And yes, his shadow, Mike DeLuca, at the time. And he laid out how it was going to work. That we're going to produce it until the strike ends. We'll just produce it, with non-union writers. I think they made some sweet promises about when the strike ends, they'll try to keep us aboard. I don't think there was ever any intention to that. Just to some of us that weren't actually producing the show. But it was cool. It was great. It was, and I think it was $6,300 to write the hour. For some reason that number sticks in my head. That was the first produced work. So yeah, that's like the first. You get your first dollar, you put it in the frame.
You're remembering more about that part of it than I did. I probably wasn't in that meeting, because at that point, I'm not sure we were doing it through my company. Because what happened was it became urgent that I get out there and do this, because they needed to get it done, because Lorimar was going to muddy the waters, if you were. I mean, Warner Brothers would end up muddying the waters. So it had to be a completely independent project. And for some reason, it couldn't be New Line either. So that was the reason for setting up my independent company.
And I wonder if the fact that the Writers Guild, that the strike was happening and they were going to start creating scripts, they didn't want to create a situation afterwards where.
I don't think it was about the Writers Guild. It might have been. I think it was always intended to be non-guild anyway, that we were just going to find a way to write it, and that Freilich and then later Froelich were both working as producers, not as writers.
Sure. Oh, well, yeah. Yeah. That gambit.
That's my recollection.
Yeah.
But it's old. By the way, this show and Children of the Corn 2 are the 2 reasons I state most often for why I don't do scripted anything.
And for good reason.
But it's our fault?
No,
that's funny.
It's my fault. It's my fault because I realized how little non-writing producers get to do unscripted stuff.
Oh, well, yeah, it's the cool thing about TV is that it's a writer-producers medium, but a writer-producers medium. And you can really go soup to nuts. And it's from a creative perspective. Yeah, that's why TV is awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah. I'm developing a hybrid show right now that's half scripted, and I'm really enjoying working with an incredibly talented showrunner. And I just love just being able to hand it off and say, "That's your lane."
Yeah,
go do that part.
after the first 6 scripts were written, Gil and I wrote one of them. The show went union, and those of us who were not union were quickly forgotten. But before that happened, we wrote the script, and I'm trying to think what was the name of who directed that first episode, because we were the first
Toby
episode.
Hooper. Toby
Yeah,
Hooper.
I guess it was
Wasn't it?
Toby. Yeah, that's right. Toby directed that first episode.
Take 2.
Oh wow, wow.
Right.
Yeah, we'll get to Children of the Corn too momentarily.
Yeah, please don't. That's a nightmare.
Hey, how not to make a
Talking
movie?
about David
I'm not
Price.
sure. Ooh, yeah, we're going to talk about David.
I think some of the dried blood on that clapperboard is mine.
Indeed.
I'm sure. And Larry Cuppins too.
Yeah.
Ultimately, Freddy's was, I think we put together a great show, considering all the challenges, all the creative challenges. The fact that it's got a fan base all these years after the fact.
The fact that we got anything done that was a scripted show that's half hours as 2 hours. For what was the budget, Gil?
Oh, I can't think of it. 469 comes to mind. I have no idea.
Yeah, it was 450 or something like that an hour. That's just ridiculous. Even in its day, it was by a third what it should have cost.
And there was no stopping in the writing, and there's no stopping in the shooting for the writing, so that we finished an episode in 5 days, and on the 6th day, the next episode started, and we would do 22 hours straight.
We shot hours, but you guys, I was not part of the production. You guys shot hours in 5 days.
Yeah.
How many pages? Now, our friend Joel would have found this shocking, but how many pages a day were you doing on Freddy's Guild?
Oh, at least 10. In fact, the funny story with Joel, I think I've told this before, is when I went in for the interview with Joel, he said to me, and he's pacing back and forth in front of his office, in front of his desk. He said, every day, I don't know how you're going to do this, every day, and it has to look like film. Every day you have to shoot 5 pages, 5 pages every day. Can you do that? And I looked at him and I said, what do we do after lunch?
That's my Gil. Yes, I'm used to that.
So yeah, we did 10 pages a day, and I don't think we really thought much of it. It's only later in retrospect when when people said, how'd you do that? And we would go, well, we didn't have a choice.
That's right. We were backing into a concept that does work in today's business. If we were to do it today, we would take the time and write all the scripts up front and then go in and shoot them.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, yeah. You could actually design the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think it's not a ridiculous concept if you have the right writer who can figure it out. Did you ever look at Bandersnatch, the Choose Your Own Adventure project on Netflix?
Yeah.
Where they had all the different trees and everything. They created an algorithm and an entire computer program that allowed them to write for it.
Yeah.
It really isn't a TV show. It's a game.
It's a game, yeah.
But it's really interesting, and it's an interesting new form of storytelling.
But consider how storytelling has informed gaming.
Right.
And all the different ways that the two worlds have informed each other, and innovations in storytelling have suddenly made gaming much more visceral, and the gaming experience has absolutely informed certainly action movies.
It has. Well, Legends of the Hidden Temple was based on my obsession with Legend of Zelda, mixed with Indiana Jones at the time. So the inspiration for that came from a different concept, but we put this overlay of what, in the early days, this was 1997, the early days of video games, is that if that character could come out and tell a story, what would the story be? And that it's it's easier and easier to think that through now with the technology. Particularly, I teach in the film school now, full circle with Jerry Lewis' story. I teach in that film school now, television, and the students that are pitching ideas to me now are all pitching projects that are based on their reality, which is really more YouTube user generated TikTok than even television and film.
Mm-hmm.
And not to say that they won't become story driven, but they're going to bring that sensibility to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think absolutely. It's the experience. I've got a 24-year-old and a 22-year-old, and they, even when they watch TV, it's this way. It's a multimedia experience.
Yeah, or it's this way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But if you look at some of the older movies from 20 years or older, and you go, oh wow, that was a movie I really loved, and you watch it again, even I find myself, come on, move it along, it's too slow. And so these people, these kids today, everything's got to be very quick, and you got to sucker them into a show or a character or whatever the story you're telling quickly, otherwise you lose them.
You know what's really interesting about that, Gil, and this is a very small sample, so I don't want to extrapolate too deep on it, is I have 40 students, and they're all getting a double major in film and television and business. And they, 10 years ago, they were all like that. This particular group, and this is the group that lost their high school to COVID and spent their first year in college in COVID. Your kids, they're 22-year-olds.
They experienced COVID in college. Yeah, it was terrible.
So I have the year after that and the year, 2 years. So they're like 20 and 21. They are slowing down. They're turning off, if you will. And when I asked them the idea about binging versus once a week in terms of a release pattern, most of them said they would prefer doing it once a week. They said, we don't like being encouraged to sit and not get up from the TV over and over again, which is so different.
Yeah, good for them. Good for them.
Yeah, surprising, frankly.
Sane,
right?
sanity. Yeah, we're handing them a crazy, chaotic world, and they don't want the chaos.
Yeah, they're being protective of their souls. Yeah.
And it also gives them time to digest and regurgitate or react to, what they liked or what they didn't like or what their criticism is. Whereas when you binge watch it,
forget.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right though. They absorb and they think and they talk to their friends about it too. They're
which is
actually
great.
Social media about that part, which is the modern day water cooler.
I remember a time when you couldn't have the only way you can have a character making a phone call is if they were next to a landline or a payphone. Remember payphones? And now suddenly characters can communicate any information instantaneously to anywhere in the world. That's no longer a problem. How information travels from point A to point wherever the fuck.
Which also is problematic for storytelling because you've got to accommodate that. And where years ago you didn't have that problem because it took more time, now it's instant. So it does create the writing and the storytelling.
Now
because your projects are going worldwide instantaneously too.
Yeah,
they're going into 120 countries with 18 different languages, and that's a different development. I was lucky enough to have Ted Sarandos come down and speak at USC a couple weeks ago, and without giving, I told him it was all cone of silence when we were there, so I don't think I'm giving away anything that's proprietary or that I shouldn't. But he was fascinating about talking about how they think about the future of television. And I asked him the question, what comes after streaming? Like, what's the next? Is there a new technology that's going to change the world like streaming has? And his feeling was no, that this is it. So I said, okay, great. So we can start to settle into this as being our future right now and not have to worry about where we're going to be 10 years from now. because you remember, Gil, every 10 years, we've been changing
Formats.
our entire distribution platform.
Yeah.
And that's a huge, it's exciting, but it's also annoying and exhausting.
Why does he think it won't change further?
He thinks this is the last big technology. He says the next technological delivery would be into your brain, and you really can't. That he doesn't see that happening. He's not Elon Musk that way. Of course, you know, he's the one that's sitting in a video store, thought of the idea of him being sort of a human algorithm of telling his customers what they might like based on what they rented last week. That's a famous story, but it's a true story of, you know, how Netflix's algorithm became a real thing.
Was 2 years of Freddy's guaranteed, or was the second year hinging on some kind of success of the first year of Freddy's?
That's a really good question, and I don't remember exactly, but I'm going to go with the financial model was based on 2 years. But in those days, Telepictures was so powerful with the TV stations that they would go in and make a 2-year deal. Say you can only have this if you give us both years.
Our deal, however, Alan, was a 1-year deal, I believe, and then
it was we
got picked up for the second year.
In the second season,
did I make you do it cheaper?
Well, that's a good question too. You know, we had the experience on Crypt where we got punished for being so good the first year that they
gave us less money the
second. So
don't be putting me in the Joel Silver camp.
And hence a penny spent is a penny wasted.
That and the Collect the Brad's box at the door were my two favorite memories of Freddy's.
In the second season of Freddy's, you felt confident enough, Gil, to direct for the first time.
Yeah, because it sort of was financial. You know, they allowed me to write and us to write in the first season. And then the second season, they said, well, you know, we can't pay you any more money to produce. It isn't in the budget, and you've written and you can write some more. Maybe you want to direct. Which scared the shit out of me. And I was like, okay, sure.
Who said that to you, by the way? Freilich or Freilich? It wouldn't have been me. Maybe I remember you asking if you could direct, but maybe I was just maybe it was just me. By then, everybody was out of the picture, other than the fact that I refused to work with Jeff Freilich again.
Right. I'm in that same category after that second season.
What issues occurred between you all?
It was the problem with the show was it was being run by a guy who's used to running primetime scripted Lorimar high budget programming and not doing a low budget independent. He's also was used to working with a studio. And when you work with a studio, if you go over budget, the studio can cover it and fire you, or they can just cover it. And if the show's successful, you get another gig and they pay you more. But when it's my money, and I was 30 years old and it was literally my money and I was guaranteeing the budget, and figure that out. What is that? $10 million there and another $6 million on Funhouse. And it was all on my back. And when someone's not paying attention to the budget, or, you know, in those days, and to this day, still, I think still a lot of primetime showrunners, their deal is they're going to direct the last episode. So what they do is they save up a whole bunch of money in every episode, and then they splurge on the last episode because that's the one they're directing because they want to put it up for an Emmy. And in my recollection, that was some of the stuff that was going on. And I don't work that way as an independent. I'm much more everything's, you know. So if Gil were to come to me and say, I don't know what's going on, we're trying to save money here and there, but, you know, now he wants an airplane. And I'm like, well, you can't have an airplane. And that creates a tension when someone thinks the studio is going to come and make up the money when in fact it's actually coming out of my pocket. If I were to do it again, I'm not sure I would have had the chutzpah to do that on my own and guarantee those shows. Because if it went over budget, it was literally coming out of my pocket.
And it was a very, I mean, when you consider what the ask was, yeah, to actually get it done within that budget was, it wasn't necessarily going to happen.
It was pretty insane, but that's why. So now I can speak about my friend Gil Adler a little bit. That's why Gil and I think, bonded early on in this project, is because he treated it like it was his money.
How did you find Gil?
I don't remember. You were recommended by David Salzman, is that right?
No, by Bob Shea.
By Bob Shea. Okay.
I knew Bob Shea from New York when I was in New York.
Oh, from New York, right.
And he had just started this distribution company, and his first big success was Get Out Your Handkerchief. And I knew Bob from then. And I went to him with movies to make for no money, and he always said no. And then out of the blue one day, I think, I don't know how or why, I heard from Bob, and he said, I'm doing this show. You have to do it. I want you to do it. I trust you with the money, blah, blah, blah. And I think he said, go meet with Scott Stone, or I don't know if I met with somebody at Lorimar first.
Salzman, maybe. Even Salzman, yeah. David, yeah.
And I think that's how it started.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. For those listening, here's a situation where I met somebody many, many, many years ago at the very beginning of my career, perhaps the first thing I ever did in television. And we became not only allies in making that television and making other things, but became really good friends that lasted all these years. And I would say to people, really look for that when you're starting out in your career and you're trying to move forward. Look for those kinds of relationships, because they don't happen very often, but when they do, you should cherish them. And that's what I've always thought and felt about you, Scott, because, we got on very well. We had arguments, we had fights, of course, but we always resolved them, and we always figured it out, and we always made it work. And that's the difference between somebody like, working with Jeff Froelich or somebody working with you and me together.
There are people who are team people, and there are people who aren't, frankly. And if you can find the people who like being on a team, it makes all the difference in the world. And I have always felt that this business tries to create people who are petulant children. And we attract petulant children, and then we nurture that, and then we kind of celebrate it, and then it becomes part of the business. And I've never liked being in that kind of an environment. So yes, you have to look for them, Gil. And when you find them, not only cherish them, but support each other, and then try to do business with each other, because that's how you keep them in the business. Because look at the three of us. We're, God forbid, elder statesmen at this point. At the time we did this, we were 30 years younger, more. Yeah. And our careers could have been over shortly after that show. That could have been the last show, right? Every show could be the last show.
Oh, absolutely.
And here we are 30-some years later, having done dozens of shows afterwards. And that's because we keep putting together groups of people that like to work together. Otherwise, you don't last.
When did Children of the Corn come? I don't remember the chronology. Were you still doing the second season of Freddy's Nightmares, or was that already done?
Let me help set this up a little bit.
I'm trying to remember how that all happened.
Well, let me help set this up a little bit before I give it back to Scott. So Scott moves into this incredibly beautiful house off of Sunset Boulevard. Incredible. And
right at the top, the one with the jetliner views. Yeah,
on the Bird Streets. And invites me over one day, and I see this incredible piece of property in this house, and it's just magnificent. And we're chatting and we're talking. And then a few days later, I think I get a phone call from Scott after I think the following happened. And I'll give it back to you, Scott.
That's it? You're not going to tell the rest of the story? Okay, I'll tell it.
Yeah.
First of all, let me be really clear so that people don't think that I stole a bunch of money and bought this ridiculous house, A, or B, that I come from money. I come from no money. Literally, like my parents, nothing. Although my mother did help me get my first job working for for Chuck Braverman, which is a whole other story. I actually should have been.
I think you have described, you have amply described, your work ethic is unquestionable. So you don't have to defend that.
Let me be clear. The reason why I owned this house is because my lawyer at the time, who just passed away, Abe Summer, may he rest in peace, came to me and said, there's a house I've had my eyes on a block from my house. It's an incredible piece of property. It's been in the same family since it was built in the 20s. Wow. It's and it's in an estate, and it's being sold at auction by the courts. And I think you can get a great deal on it. It's a great opportunity. You should buy this house. And I was living in a house that would be nice and paid off shortly thereafter, which is up in Nichols Canyon, which I loved. And I looked at this house, and it was a tear-down house, but on the most incredible piece of property. And those days when you're 30-something years old and you have a show and you're making decent money, not huge money, but decent money, you're thinking it's going to go on forever, right? Mm.
Oh, yeah.
So
I'm going to live forever. Come on.
I listened to my lawyer, and I put in an offer on this house thinking there's no way I'm going to get it. And of course, I get the house. In court, judge, etc. Really good deal, but the house needs tons of money to develop.
Can I ask can I ask what the house what that did cost back in that at that time?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was somewhere between $1.5 million and $2 million in the day.
Wow.
It's a lot of money. But I had another house that was already almost paid off that I'd had for 8 years that had really appreciated in value. Markets were going up at that point and real appreciated value. So I thought, okay, I can sell my other house. I can buy this house. I'll be really, stretched out, but I can live in it the way it is because I'm a single guy, and I'll just live in this crap house, and I can fix it up when I fix it up. I mean, it was a nice house, but it hadn't been touched since it was built. So I move into this house, and up above, I'm part of it in front of me, and I'm looking up at the house above me, and I'm noticing that the swimming pool of the house above me is like hanging out over my property. And I'm walking up there looking at the fence line, and the guy who lives there is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He says, you can't just look out onto my pool. And I'm like, well, first of all, this is my property. And second of all, it looks like your pool's on my property. He goes, no. So he backs way down. I introduce myself, and he says, well, what do you do for a living? So I explained to him that I was doing this show called Freddy's Nightmares. He goes, oh, that's really interesting. I'm in the, TV movie business too, and tells me a little about himself, and I shake hands with him. I don't know anything about the guy. Fade out, fade in. We start this kind of relationship, and turns out he's a guy who's a famous lawyer who was a partner at New World Entertainment when they were a big movie company. And he sold New World to Ron Perlman, the big Revlon guy. But he kept, as part of the deal, the rights to do sequels to their movies. And two of their movies that they had that they wanted to do were Hellraiser, one, and Children of the Corn. Those are the two shows that he had the rights to, and said, you did Freddy's Nightmares for $450 an hour. If I gave you $900,000 for 2 hours, we're back to the same story, right? Can you do a movie for $900,000? Because everybody I talk to wants like $3 million to do a movie, and I don't want to spend that much money. So I said, sure. What do I know? Of course we can. We just did, a bunch of them. I said,
you like them in half hours and hours and 2 hour blocks as well?
Yeah, right. So I said, as long as you do it while we have the studio up and running, we've got a studio already. We built the studio, got crew going. If I could tack it on to the end of my production schedule, we should be able to crank it out pretty quickly. So he said, great. And then says, how about a script? So that's when I came to you guys and said,
how about a script?
Script. Right? And that started the movie. Now, the fade out, fade in is two things. One is he didn't get his money together for at least a year and a half. So that by the time it got greenlit, after you guys wrote the script and everything else, we were way past Freddy's Nightmares, and I didn't have the studio. And I had to now figure out a way to do a movie without a studio, which ended up costing about $1.2 million or $1.3 million. We shot it in North Carolina. It's the worst experience, one of the worst experiences of my life. I've had many. The other fade out, fade in is now the strike hits, I think, was around that time, and the industry tanks. And I have no shows on the air, and I've got this massive amount of overhead in this big house that I bought. And I realized how stupid it was, because it was a money pit and it required a full-time gardener and et cetera, et cetera. So I sold the house and I moved into a much more normal living situation again. I miss that house, but I don't miss, I would never be still living there anyway. It's ridiculously, who needs a house like that? Now I'm a married man with 2 kids, but.
So did you make that movie in North Carolina or Iowa? I thought you guys went to Iowa.
No, we made it in Liberty, North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
Little town in the triangle where, like Raleigh, Durham, Winston-Salem, all around there. Yeah, it was a little tiny thing. We took over the whole town.
And by the time the money came around finally to produce it, Gil and I were engaged in producing the first season of Tales from the Crypt.
Right.
And so we were not able to join the rest of you in North Carolina as you. I do remember sitting and working on the script. Gil and I and Bill Froelich had played a part in strategizing the script, and we gave it a contemporary spin. It had to do with ergot. I think that was the problem. It was the corn. We explained why the corn had turned bad, and everyone was
yeah, it was a bacteria of some sort or something.
Aflatoxins.
Aflatoxin, right. There you go. Yeah. So
there was a reporter, and there was
I remember there were a couple scenes that I really liked in the script. The fatal nosebleed in church.
Best scene in the movie, I would say, probably.
That was fun writing that. And then I think when we handed
the fun part of that story, not to jump ahead to the end of the story, was that it ended up getting picked up by the Weinsteins for Dimension. They did their horror version of Miramax. So after the movie was done and delivered, Bob Weinstein got involved in it and wanted us to go back and add all these special effects that had nothing to do with the story, but wanted to have a special effects movie. That was a fun meeting with Bob Weinstein.
Did you ever do that? Did you do the special effects or no?
Yeah, we did them. Not only did we do the special effects, but then he hated. We had this guy, Licht, David Licht, wrote this incredible score for it. And then they wanted a different score. And I said, no, I love the score. And they just took the movie and swapped the score out for some really bad TV movie music.
And the director of the movie was?
Didn't tell me. David Price.
David Price.
One other non-DGA film. He was a film school graduate. His father is Frank Price, the famous Columbia TriStar movie executive who just passed away recently. Did he or no? Frank's still around?
I think he did last year.
He just passed away, yeah. And this was David's, speaking of petulant children, his opportunity to be a petulant child.
I remember he called me once. I don't know if you remember this story, but he called me once and he said, the girl, I forgot who was ever the lead in the movie, at one point she agreed to be topless for this one scene where he's spying her in a wooded area
under a waterfall. She's bathing in a waterfall, so a natural place to I don't know.
I remember this conversation. I think I called you.
Oh, and he said, I think maybe he called me after you called me because he heard that you had called me, and it was like, well, what do you do? An actress won't. She said she agreed. Now she won't do it. I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I shot her with her clothes on, and she's in the waterfall. And I said, how do you explain that? Because I don't. I mean, she's just under there. I said, well, why didn't you ask her if she would be okay if you put her back to camera and she took off her top, so we'd see her back, we wouldn't see anything else, but you would understand why this guy is spying on her. And I think, I don't think it was you. I think it was David yelling. He started yelling at me saying, "That's why you should be here. How come you're not here? If you were here, we would have done that." And I was like, "Hey, I'm sorry." It's kind of obvious to me that that's what you would next try to do. But
you certainly, you would think of sticking a young woman under a waterfall fully dressed. It's just, I don't know how you would explain it to yourself as the director, because you're going to have to, you got to see the logic from every character's point of view. It takes you right out of the movie as you're watching, because you think, what is she doing?
I don't know. I know plenty of guys that would be just as happy to see a wet T-shirt as they would to see a naked body.
Well, but
and I'm gay, so I can't really speak to that part.
There were a lot of strange decisions. I know, we were, because we were absorbed in making our TV show, and yeah, I know Gil was in touch with that set a lot more than I was, and the stories coming from it were, it sounded like you guys were not having fun. David was more a hindrance than a director.
There was not a lot of vision going on.
No,
sadly, I learned a lot from the film, because I know now how important it is that a director, not a producer, is responsible for tone, look, feel, casting, the whole bit. Because when you look at that film now, I actually had a chance to try to watch it the other day, about a month or two ago. I couldn't get past the first 15 minutes, sadly, mainly because it was just bringing back all these weird memories.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's
just, it doesn't know what it is. It's trying to be sort of clean looking, but it's really, the original was so gritty and dirty and not clean, and it didn't, we couldn't match it. We didn't match that, which didn't help. And then the acting was a little on the nose, and there was no subtlety to it. And if I go back to it now, I could see how I could have made it probably a better film. As a producer, I could have done a better job helping him to make it better. But it really does kind of come down to who you cast and how you make it look.
Yeah.
But strangely enough, it succeeded well enough to have launched a whole string of sequels to that sequel.
I know, right? Well, then the funny thing is about that is, I told them I would produce the sequels, and then of course they brought them all in-house and did them without us. But to be completely full circle, the worst, most scathing review of the film was by Leonard Maltin. And I cherish the fact that it's like, the worst Stephen King sequel in the history of blah, 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 blah. And so Leonard Maltin now teaches the most famous screening class at USC that was originally created by Arthur Knight, and then I forget who did it after him, but it's always like, they call it Thursday night at the movies, and there's always a big film, and then they have the director or the star come, and it's usually something that's just about to be released. So there's a tradition of them doing it with all the Marvel films. So they had the latest Marvel film, or one of them, a few months ago, and I go to them regularly, and Leonard was there, and I went up to him, and I've met him several times, and I just thanked him once again for breaking me of the film urge to become a film producer, because his review of the film sort of cemented my decision to get out of the movie business, and just what I like doing. Mostly wasn't fun because there's nothing to do on the set, right? Except make sure the catering's there and they're not going over budget.
When you're in a way, Children of the Corn 2 was a lesser example of how not to make a movie than Ose Bordello of Blood, which is the textbook of how not to make a movie from start to fucking finish. But they are the movies that you mismake are much more instructive than movies that you make correctly. And
Maybe, I guess I would say every movie is a miracle, including Bordello of Blood. They're just a miracle that anybody gives you that kind of money to go and do something where you're just looking at a piece of paper going, I'm going to make something out of that. Because there's so many things that can go wrong, including, as you know, everything.
Right.
It's just a miracle that they get made. And when they're good, that's an even bigger miracle. But just getting them done is a miracle.
Indeed, one way or the other. You've spent a lot of time at your alma mater. You're on the faculty now. You're an adjunct professor.
I am. That just means that they don't pay you, and I do it in my spare time. And
okay,
you do it for love.
But hey, you're there, and you're in the TV department.
I actually teach 2 classes. The one I started teaching, which is interesting, if you have time for a short story, I've been on the board of the film school for years. The dean, who's been there for almost 30 years, is a brilliant woman named Elizabeth Daly. And I was one of the first people, she'll tell you, that went to see her when she got there. And I basically said, this place needs your help. Don't screw this up, please. And don't forget about television. And over the years, from when I first started, when I was there, they didn't even hear about television. And all you could do was be a director, a producer, not a producer, director, editor, cinematographer, animation, or a sound person. Those are the things they taught you. They didn't teach you writing. They didn't teach you producing. They didn't teach you distribution. They didn't teach you the business side, none of that. Now we teach everything, but we also teach television. And when I first started there, 85, 90% wanted to be in the feature film business, and 5 or 10% wanted to be in the TV business. Now it's flipped the other way around. Most of the people in film school that are there to learn how to make other things other than feature films. Yeah. So every year for 25 years, she's been there 3 years, in this alumni group, she's asked our alumni what we should be teaching that we're not teaching. And this is a decent group. This is John Singleton, may he rest in peace, and Andrew Marlowe, and John Wells is not in this group, but it's like that level of people, the Todd sisters. And so they'd come around to me, and I'm the one person nobody knew. And I'd always say, we should be teaching reality television. And everybody would laugh, and we'd move on. And every year I would do it kind of as a joke. And I'd say, no, seriously, like, it's really becoming a business. We should teach reality TV. And everybody would laugh. So one year, about 15 years ago, I said it again. And before they could laugh, John Singleton, who was sitting next to me, said, oh, that reminds me, after this meeting, I know this family out in the valley I think would be a great reality show I want to talk to you about. And the dean heard it, and she looked at me and she said, okay, you may be right. Now's the time. The Kardashians had become a hit, and all of the reality shows had started hitting. So she said, we should start teaching that, and you're going to teach it. So I teach a course in the graduate program at SC in reality TV, and it's all students that want to be John Singleton or Ryan Johnson or Ryan Coogler. And I'm teaching about reality TV, and they're realizing how hard it is, which is really kind of interesting for them to see the switch to reality TV. So then that I've been doing for 15 years, and now we're developing that out into a much bigger project. The other class I teach is a volunteer project. I teach students that are business students getting a second degree in cinematic arts to learn how to balance commerce and creativity, exactly what we're talking about, in an everyday basis in creating, but only about TV. So these are students that we're going to be working for in the future that hopefully will now understand the creative process as opposed to just understanding the business process. And
sounds like a good class.
It's fun. This is the one that Sarandos came down to speak in, and he was amazing. And remember Mark Gitkin? My ex-agent was down last week.
My ex-agent.
That's so funny.
Yeah. I saw on your website, Mark does a testimonial saying lovely things about you, which of course he would. Well, you know, you are. Yeah. It was so funny to see Mark. I just wasn't expecting to see him, and I got nostalgic for the old days. Jesus.
Right.
How is he? What's he doing? He retired, right? And
he's great. He's retired, but he's doing a lot. Like he and I are working on a couple of things together, actually. Yeah, he's not going to give up. He's got a Broadway musical he's working on forever.
Well, say hello for us, will you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Aside from that, you are the father of two
kids, 20 and 22. Yeah, 2 boys.
Huh.
Amazing. Yeah. In the days before egg donors and surrogates were big, we were the crapshoot guys trying to figure out how to do that.
Fatherhood you have enjoyed. I take it.
Oh god, fatherhood's the best,
isn't it?
Yeah, you learn how small you are when you have kids, right? How unimportant.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think everything I know about the world actually I learned from them.
I will tell you, if you are out there and you are actually going to be in our business, being a parent helps you be a producer or a writer or anything else. You learn how to work in a team without shutting people down. Because it's really easy just to shut people down when you're the head of a team. But when you have kids, they don't shut down easily.
No, and in that sense, a good production unit is a family. In all the good ways and all the bad ways, but yeah, when that family unit works cohesively, you can do anything. It has been such a pleasure spending the time catching up. I learned things I didn't know about some of the shows I worked on, and we're grateful to you, Scott, for taking, good God, all of Friday, it seems, to sit here with us.
My pleasure. It's been great to see you, Alan. I haven't seen you forever. Gil, I see occasionally, but
yeah. I'm.
You look the same. If I just see from here down, you look exactly the same.
There's nothing below here, actually. It's I'm entirely robotic.
Well, I told Gil I'm wearing shorts today, so it's it's 70 degrees and sunny here in LA. If I could add one piece of advice to your audience. Never discount the value of any relationship despite what might happen over the years, because like with your relationship, when they come back around at the right time in the right way, it continues to be meaningful. And I will still hold out some hope that may happen with my ex-business partner as well, but it's important that you can leave that open to some kismet in the future.
As Gil and I can attest, amen, brother.
I was just about to say that, Alan.
and
I was just about to say amen, brother.
And on that, hey, we're all thinking in the same headspace together note. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrible crypt content.